Is this whale killing Polkadot? And the Battle of Referendum 213. So hi everyone, welcome to Edison Bob. Today I want to share a story with you about what is happening in the biggest decentralized autonomous organization in all of crypto, which is Polkadot and the open on-chain governance system. And this is a story that is actually relevant for everyone who is interested in governance systems, because it shows what happens in a big governance system that is evolving and is showing emerging patterns of how big whales, users, and everyone in this ecosystem is interacting, how treasury money is spent, how fights about these decisions are being made, how we see coalitions and oppositions forming. And I want to start with this meme, which is OpenGov is not working. So open governance, this governance system of Polkadot, was introduced early this year for Polkadot, and many people are saying OpenGov is not working. This is basically just a few whales making the decision. What everyone else is thinking does not really matter. It's the big token holders, and everyone else is just there to maybe participate in a debate. But in the end, we are all powerless. And I think what we saw in recent days is actually going to prove the opposite. So this whole situation got so intense that some people are even saying OpenGov should have its own Netflix series, which might be true if you're very invested in the whole thing. But I still think Web3 is opening up these new venues of creating governance where we can create our own systems of governance and agree on what we're doing together. So this is very relevant. And the fight, this battle of referendum 213 that you saw in the recent days, it was very close for many, many days. So there was even a point where it was like 50-50. So there were, and to give you some context, what was this referendum about? This was actually a content spending proposal. So this was a content spending proposal about, at the time, $90,000. Of course, it was denominated in the DOT token, so the value fluctuates, can be $100,000. But it was basically a proposal for $90,000. And this battle got so intense that you could just see a lot of whales and accounts participating. So in green here, you see the pro voters, the I voters. In red, you see the voters against, the nay voters. And it was actually hundreds of millions, at least $100 million of value that was put up in terms of votes. So capital holders, users that hold millions of dollars, were voting either in favor or against this proposal. This is how heated this decision became. And so you can determine this is not just about the single proposal, but it is sort of even showing that this is about setting a direction of how governance is done. So you can see here on the left side, these were the I votes, and on the right side, these were the nay votes. And the voting power, this rightmost column, these were millions of dots put up against each other. But as I just hinted, there is something far bigger going on in this whole discussion. You know, some people were saying, this is a grift proposal, and then others said, this is a legit content creator, we should support him. The discussion was basically about turning into this, there was this one big whale supporting this. We're going to talk about them in a second. And there was this discussion unfolding of should one whale have the power to support this proposal if 99% of the people are against it. Of course, this was a rhetoric, because it was more mixed how many people were for and against. But it actually shows that there is this question on people's mind, which is, can a single whale control all of Polkadot, all of the decision making of how treasury funds are being spent? And what does it say about the future of open governance? And so these are the things that we want to discuss today, and we want to take an example. We want to take the example of what happened in this proposal. And this was a whale known as 16DG, which is the beginning of the address, also known as Giotto. And this is the single biggest known whale that is actively participating in governance. So as you can see here from the votes that I counted, and I'm not even sure if I counted all the votes, so there is could be much more, but it looks like this Giotto whale has more DOT tokens and voting power at his hands than even Gavin Wood, the founder of Polkadot. And it is also becoming very active, right? So this is an analysis that I created. It's looks complicated, but it's a fairly easy chart. So on the horizontal axis, you see each different referendum. And then on the vertical axis, you see different addresses that voted for this referendum, right? And so on the top, you can see the token holders with the most tokens. On the very top, you see Giotto. And you see that he just has a lot of points voting on different referenda. You can also see a few other whales. You see 2 other whales that are also very active, and then you see a few moderately active whales. But you see that most of these whales are only voting punctually, here and there. And then you have this one big, powerful whale who just votes on a lot of proposals and is voting very, very often with yes, right? And so this created a lot of tension in the community, where few people were saying, Giotto, he's showing leadership, he wants to share his perspective and he wants to build a path towards a better Polkadot. And other people were saying this is a terrible strategy and we need to come together and make sure that this cannot pass, and all of the small voters need to come together and vote against these proposals. So you can see that the community was very split. There was a lot of discussion going on. Basically, everyone was dropping their work and starting to participate in these discussions. It was becoming very heated. So after this exposition, you might be asking, what is this whale actually doing? Why is this discussion happening? Why is the whale voting in a way that a lot of people disagree with? And will this Giotto guy destroy Polkadot, or what is his intention, right? So I have friends that were thinking about, like, this must be an antagonistic actor. This is someone who wants to destroy Polkadot. But what I want to show in this video is, if you start to read more about the ideas and the philosophy of Giotto, you see that this guy actually has a strategy. He has some thought processes. You might agree, you might disagree, but what you can acknowledge, that this is a person that actually has spent a lot of thought into what could be a good strategy into bringing Polkadot forward. And the interesting thing is, there is something far bigger even going on than this discussion about Giotto, the biggest whale on Polkadot. And this is what the actual topic of this video is about today, and that is coalitions and oppositions. And I want to argue in this video that Giotto and Crypto's chain from Referendum 213, they are actually pushing OpenGov forward. And I will show you why. So stay with us, bear with us. Welcome to Edison Bob. Let's jump in. So the agenda for today, what are we going to talk about? The first part is this initiative that Giotto founded, which is the DOT Autonomous Marketing Initiative. And to understand why Giotto is behaving the way he behaves, we're going to dive into the philosophy. Then there is the growing opposition that has been happening in the last days, and then actually created some interesting developments, and how coalition building can look in the future. So our topic for today, coalitions and opposition. And we want to start with this first part, which is this DOT Autonomous Marketing Initiative. So to understand what's going on is that OpenGov, this is basically mediated via platforms like Polkassembly and Subsquare. So this is websites where you can look at what is currently going on in the voting of different referenda. You see who votes for, you see who votes against, and you don't know what most of these accounts are about. Some accounts have a name tag, but then there are some very big accounts and they don't have a name associated. You just see the on-chain address. And so I guess many people are very curious and always wondering, what is this account about? What's this strategy? What they are for or against? People are looking at the voting behavior of different whales. And so over time it will emerge that there is this one very large account that is voting very often. And you know, sometimes accounts vote very often for yes, sometimes very often for no, but it's hard to understand why is this account voting in a certain way and in another way. So people who want to get their proposal through, they of course want to understand what is the way of thinking. So there was always this call for having a more debate, more discussion in these proposals, right? And at some point in Polk Assembly, 16DG was stepping forward. So he was outing himself, and he was basically giving himself the username Giotto. And he said, okay, I want to make public my strategy of how I'm voting, and I want to support content proposals. I want to be initially very liberal about content proposals and then get picky a little bit later. And I guess there was a lot of discussion around this, because a few days later, so this was 2 weeks ago from today, Giotto then made this announcement and said, okay, there is so much stuff going on in terms of content, and I want to create a Telegram group. I want to bring all the content creators together and everyone who wants to criticize content creation proposals. So I'm opening this Telegram group, and it's public, it's open to anyone can join. And anyone can join and even criticize proposals, and we can all look at them together. And so this is the DOT Autonomous Marketing Initiative. It's a Telegram group, it's open, you can join it if you want. And Giotto publicized this policy, be very generous about content creation proposals. And why? The goal is to attract more and better content creators to the ecosystem. So this is basically intended as some form of signal voting. It's sending out a signal to the market. Hey guys, there is money available. If you can create good content, you can come to the ecosystem and pick up some of the money, right? And the idea how to signal this is to be very generous to everyone who is bringing content creation proposal, but with the caveat of becoming more picky later. And this group grew very quickly, so this even started to overwhelm Giotto, where he said, on some days I'm spending 18 hours each day just to answering questions, communicating with everyone. We need some moderation for the group. And so to make it better understandable for everyone how this strategy and philosophy behind the voting is and why Giotto is voting the way he is voting, he even started creating videos. So in this next section, Giotto's philosophy, I'm going to explain Giotto's philosophy in just a few minutes. The video material that is published right now is, I guess, over an hour of material, and I'm trying to condense it for you into just a few minutes. So there are a few pieces to this, which is positive and negative spirals, bottleneck in treasury spending, then evaluating the quality of content creators, the continuum of pickiness, the power of small ideas, and the power of inversion. So few videos, and all of them are basically based on a simple idea that are being combined. So what are positive and negative spirals? Giotto is arguing that there are basically two philosophies. There's conservative spending and there's aggressive spending. And his train of thought here is that cutting costs, conservative spending, often can lead a company to reduce the quality of its product and reduce its exposure by having less marketing spend, which can reduce in a negative spiral where the company has less money available and basically get less and less money available to improve quality and exposure. And there can be aggressive spending, where if you spend aggressively, you can create higher quality products and you can increase the exposure that you're having, which can create a positive spiral. What he's also explaining in this video is that there is a difference in treasuries. There can be dollar or stable denominated treasuries, and there can be crypto or correlated treasuries. And so the idea is that when you're having a stable treasury, if you spend the money, it's spent and you just have less money available. While if you have a correlated treasury and you spend money in exposure that creates positive value, and this value flows then back into the ecosystem, the treasury correlates, so if the token gets more valuable, also the value in the treasury is increasing, right? So this is the mindset here. And so Giotto's mindset is that if you have aggressive spending, you're increasing the value of the DOT token, and so you're also increasing the amount of money that is available in the Polkadot treasury. Now, the second part is that he's identifying bottlenecks, and he says the treasury can only, might be related to this philosophy of conservative and aggressive spending. You might be saying, I want to spend conservatively because there might always be coming a better deal in the future, a better proposal in the future. While if you're rather tending to do an aggressive spending, you're saying the deal that is available right now is the best deal that I can get. And so Giotto is subscribing to this philosophy of aggressive spending. He says only the proposals that are available can be spent on. So if we want to get, so that the bottleneck of the system is that they're just not getting enough high quality, high exposure proposals into the Treasury. So if we want to remove this bottleneck and increase the flow of high quality, high exposure proposals to the Treasury, we need to get this done. So money in the Treasury is there to be spent. And if we're going to spend this money by signaling that it is available for content creators, we will attract more of them and they will submit those proposals that we're actually looking for. And then he's saying, yes, let's be generous, but not stupid. So where he's drawing the line is that he says, the worst that a proposal should perform is that it's just a waste of money. It must never have a negative effect on Polkadot, but if it is performing in the worst case as a waste of money, it's still acceptable. With the hope that in a better case, in a positive case, you're actually increasing value and adding value to the system, right? So how do you evaluate the quality of content creation proposals? There are two things that are important for Giotto. Number one is to support high reach content so that new people are getting attracted into the ecosystem. And number two is to support high quality content to retain the people that are already in the ecosystem. And this creates the space to support content that is more relevant for people within the ecosystem. But for Giotto, it also creates the space for supporting proposals that are reached at a general audience, are very broad, can be, let's say, shallow in a way of content and what is actually communicated. What is important is to get reach and quality content. And in this way, Giotto is also saying he's not voting on every proposal. He just wants to vote on proposals that he understands, and his specialization is in content. So this is why Giotto is voting on content proposals. But what Giotto is also saying, this will not last forever. This is to attract high quality, high reach content creators. And as more and more of those get attracted, there is a continuum of pickiness, and over time we can become, and he will become, more and more picky. So there is a continuum between always voting no and always voting yes. And there is a lot of space in between where you can say, oh, I'm even voting yes, even if it's like a much too big ask. And then over time, I'm voting yes, but only if the price is right. And then over time, I'm becoming maybe even very critical and only selecting a few of the best proposals and so on, right? So this helps us understand why Giotto is supporting all kinds of proposals right now, even if a lot of people would think that this is not a high quality content proposal or a high reach content proposal. The idea is more to signal to all the other content creators, hey, even if some people that you might think you're better at, even if they can get money from the Polkadot Treasury, and maybe even this amount, then it would be maybe attractive for you to consider submitting a content creation proposal to the Polkadot Treasury. So that's the thinking and mindset behind this strategy. Be very generous first and then become more picky over time. So the last two philosophical bits that Giotto shared, and then we're coming to a certain conclusion. The power of small ideas. So he says people obsess over big events at a certain point in time. And what is often not visible in history books is that there are also low and incremental phenomena, and there's stuff that takes time, that happens over a century or even longer. So one example is the discovery of electricity, which was discovered, I was reading up the Wikipedia article, it was discovered over a long period of time. So people already knew that, I don't know, there's lightning and there's eels and so on, but connecting all those dots and then discovering that you might be able to generate your own electricity and then building electricity networks. These were small discoveries over time, and this went on for centuries, right? So it was the small incremental improvements that led us to building the civilization we actually have today. And another example is the iPhone. So there was this big invention of the original iPhone, which combined a lot of technologies. And then every year after that, we are always hearing from Apple, this is the best iPhone ever. And yes, of course it is the best iPhone ever because there was a small incremental change. And people are always complaining, yeah, the iPhone is not really getting that much better, so you don't need a new iPhone every year because it's just incremental changes. But then you can say, combine the iPhone today with the original iPhone from 2007, and you see that this was a huge leap in all of the components that are within the iPhone, right? So he believes strongly in this power of small ideas. He says we forget about the small and invisible things that are important. And what if every day we can push Polkadot forward piece by piece? Content piece by content piece, new user by new user, and so on and so on. And he's arguing, try to become a champion of incremental innovation, marketing, and content creation. And he's closing with, let's go for small ideas instead of big ideas. And I find this one interesting because it contrasts a little bit with the voting policy of Ivy Network, which is another big whale in the ecosystem. And Ivy is actually saying, reward boldness. Small projects are unlikely to move the needle. We want to support big projects with a big vision that are adding like big new cornerstones to Polkadot. So we see the different whales have different policies and different ways of looking at things. And there is a little bit of a contrast in this. Last thing, the power of inversion is a very interesting thought experiment, which I'm not standing fully behind, but it's still very interesting. And so it starts with this example of how can a meteorologist help pilots survive or like make better flights. And so what you can do is by starting with an inversion and basically ask, how can I create the worst possible scenario for a pilot in an airplane, which would be to direct them into bad weather. So what can you do as a meteorologist to help a pilot? You do the opposite. You're making sure that they're not flying into bad weather. And so apply to Polkadot, how can we destroy Polkadot in that we are making sure that no one hears about Polkadot. And so to invert that, we have to make sure that people hear about Polkadot. I think, yes, this is basically true, but you could also argue on the other hand, I mean, imagine someone is dying and you can keep them in the hospital and you keep them alive. So the thing to not let them die is to make sure they get enough blood like air and nutrients into the system. But they're still not living, they're still just like staying there in the hospital. So it might not be the best example, but it's still an interesting thought experiment, and I think you can draw some interesting conclusions if you follow it. So this was the philosophy of Giotto. Now let's look at what has actually happened in the last few days and how everything developed. And yeah, we let the video in with basically saying that, yeah, there was a big contentious fight. There was a lot of discussion on Twitter. People were for, people were against, and a lot of people were mobilizing to get votes against this proposal from Crypto's chain, Referendum 213, right? So, and at some point it just became a question, is Giotto actually going to increase his conviction and basically kill the vote, or basically making sure that he definitely wins the vote? And this is where he posted something interesting, because he said, we are not going to change our conviction or the size of the vote. We vote like this in order to give a head start to marketing initiatives. Because there is a bias against marketing, but if the community rally enough votes against, we respect the outcome of the process. The process is more important than the outcome. And this is a really interesting insight, because it shows us that Giotto to a degree respects the wishes of a lot of the community members. And he says, I'm going to vote to a certain extent, but if there is a really big backlash against something, then he's going to respect this. And what does it mean the process is more important than the outcome? It shows this understanding that OpenGov is a shared process with many participants, and not always about like voting stronger than the others. It's about creating a shared process of governance, creating a shared system of how we can organize our ecosystem together. And this opposition actually mounted. So you can see here, this is the green dashed line, which is how much votes there were actually for and against. And so basically, if you draw a line in the middle, this would be 50%. And if there are more than 50%, then it is for. And you can just see that there was initially very big support from Giotto, but then you saw more and more and more neighbors coming in, pushing the support for this proposal under actually 50%, right? And so the final result as of today, it's not completely decided, but yesterday morning this was 50-50. And within half a day, this completely turned around. And today in the morning I was looking and it's basically 2/3 against 1/3. So you can see that the support from, it was originally, it was like 34 million dot against 34 million dot or something like this, 35 against 35. And so there was an additional 20 million dot in effective votes mobilized. And this shows you that there is not a single whale controlling the Polkadot ecosystem. There is actually an equilibrium of power, and there are enough active participants and whales that care about the ecosystem to get mobilized and to become active and participate and vote with their conviction, either with yes or with no. And so it's not only about opposition and making sure that no one else is getting their wish, but actually the next question we're coming to is how can we build coalitions, and how is this political system of Polkadot evolving, right? And so Giotto is sharing one last idea, or one latest idea, and this is about vote trading. So I don't know, my first reaction is like, oh, vote trading, what is he intending? Is like, does he want to pay for votes, or what's going on here? And so he tells the story. I got contacted by someone, by another whale, I suppose, who is supporting a proposal that I do not support. But they don't support a proposal that I support. And now the question is, should we vote for each other's proposal? Am I willing to pay the price of voting for your proposal? And are you willing to pay the price of voting for my proposal? So that both of our proposals gets accepted? And can we vote for each other? Yeah, this is a very interesting train of thought, because if you look at it like this, you say, okay, is this corruption? Are they voting for each other or not? But there's also this other view, this other perspective that you can take on it, which is actually, this is classic coalition building. You have different parties that have different interests, and they want their thing realized. And if they think that whatever they want is worth a certain amount, and you pay this amount by supporting something else also, but you get the thing that you want, then this is actually traditional coalitions. This is how you have, like in multi-party systems, this is how coalitions are forming of multiple parties that are making a government together. And then they are saying, this party is getting some of the wishes, this party is getting some of their wishes, and together they're moving an agenda forward. So vote trading, I'm not sure if this is the right word. I'm actually thinking more this is coalition building. So what Giotto is saying now is he's going to make two accounts. He's moving some of his DOT tokens into the heart account and some tokens into the brain account. And so the heart account is the account where he will only vote with those tokens for proposals he supports with his heart, that he really feels, that he really supports. And there is a second account, the brain account, and this is where he can also be convinced by logic by saying, okay, if I support your proposal and you support my proposal, I'm going to vote with the brain account even for another proposal because I logically derived this. Okay, interesting agenda. You could also keep it in a single account and just keep voting. But this is an interesting development because it's showing that Giotto is not, as the single biggest whale, does not intend to vote against other people. He actually wants to get a certain agenda done, and he's willing to compromise with certain people to be able and willing to give his tokens for other causes if it also supports his cause. And so I think if we have those people, and those people are actually following a certain strategy and they're willing to engage in a dialogue, we can come up with a broader agenda in the ecosystem of how we want to move things forward. And he stays with his point of saying, Let's be generous but not stupid. So even if you're voting for other proposals. So to conclude all of this is fine. It's all good. Sometimes we forget about this in the heat of the moment. If there is something that's either going very strongly for or against us, or it's very close. And I think, to conclude the content initiative, it pulled so many people, like influential people from the ecosystem in this discussion. I could start calling names now, but a lot of people got involved in the conversation, either on one side or in the other, or taking a third or fourth position. Everyone participated in this because it's OpenGov, and it's very dear to everyone who is active in the ecosystem to make the system work and to actually build a governance system that helps us build this network state. It helps us build a system where we can meaningfully spend money to grow the ecosystem as a whole, and to spend money on things that help everyone in this ecosystem. So I believe all of this drama in the recent days actually pushed open governance forward, and it even developed this dialectic of OpenGov. So it's sort of this discussion of should we support this or not? What are the philosophical thoughts behind this? Is vote trading acceptable or not? And there were a lot of other discussions that I didn't even touch. So I think all of this discussion put it forward because now we are thinking about coalition building. Now we are thinking about opposition. And now we can think about the way of how to do Polkadot open governance. So this is the way how we move forward. I think what we are going to do next, and what we should do next, is we should bring these high stakes voters to a table. Well, people like Giotto, people like Ivy, people like Chaos Style, Kusamarian, and so on and so on. And maybe agree on budgets, maybe agree on a certain content budget where we say this amount of money is acceptable to spend over a certain period of time. And then we have that in a sub-treasury or something, or we have this in a bounty. And then we can't stop fighting about individual proposals, and we can just say, okay, let's fight one time about the budget and agree, is it 1 million or 5 million or 10 million or whatever $1 million, 50 million. Let's fight out this one big fight about how much budget we want to spend on content creation for this next year. And then we have this fight done, and then this goes into a bounty, and then they can fight within that bounty or within that sub-treasury about who gets what amount of money and what is the right direction for it. Not everyone needs to be part of this fight if you have peace of mind that there is a general direction of how much budget we have in content creation. And if you care about more software development or about infrastructure or research or security or whatever, and you want to spend more time there, then you can go spend time there. So I think budget is important, making these big decisions, get the big decision table, makers on the table, and maybe think about the content fellowship. I think this could be very close. We could see this within half a year if we get a lot of those engaged people onto the same table, right? And I want to close with this. I think this is what we should do next. And so all of this, yeah, we can get lost in this individual discussion about this referendum passing or not. Do we support this content creator or not? We can get hung up on this discussion about is this single way of destroying Polkadot? But no, it's not the case. What we just saw is that there are so many engaged high stakes voters in this ecosystem that we can achieve an equilibrium, and we can come to same decisions where a lot of people are participating, and we can come to an agreement and then even have peace afterwards, right? So if you like this video and you want to have more, make sure to follow me on Twitter and YouTube. Hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Check out the Twitter account and make sure to retweet this. I'm going to make this also right up. See you soon.